Well, welcome everyone to the Colorado Broadband Office's Lunch and Learn series. This session will focus on the Department of Local Affairs Broadband Program. I'm Teresa Ferguson, Director of Federal Broadband Engagement with the Colorado Broadband Office, and I'll be your host for today's session. Since 2013, DOLA has provided strategic planning and infrastructure grants for middle mile networks. Working in partnership with local government, state agencies, and the private sector, DOLA has demonstrated that with the proper planning, timely investments, and local leadership, middle mile broadband connectivity can be a reality for communities in Colorado. The goal of today's webinar is to discuss DOLA's broadband program, its investments, what DOLA is currently working on, and where DOLA sees middle mile network expansion for Colorado. But before we get started today, a few logistics for the webinar. To prevent background noise, please keep yourself muted and turn off your video during the presentation. We will allow sufficient time for question and discussion following our speakers' remarks. You can enter questions in the chat at any time during the webinar, and the CBO staff will read them during the Q&A. We will also provide an opportunity for you to unmute your audio and video to ask questions during the question and answer session. Today's webinar will not be recorded. I've got this in my line, I love this. But we will hopefully provide the slide deck and make sure you guys have this information going forward. So over the course of the next hour, though, we will hear from Greg Winkler. Greg has worked for the Colorado Department of Local Affairs as the regional manager for the Northern Mountain region for the past 14 years. Prior to joining DOLA, he was the county administrator in Teller County, Colorado for 16 years. Greg has been president of the Association of Colorado County Administrators, the Colorado City and County Managers Association, and is a 25-year-plus member of the International City and County Management Association. Greg's going to walk us through DOLA's broadband program, best practices, lessons learned, and the challenges applicants face. And finally, briefly, he will discuss at the end any possible funding contained in the American Recovery Plan and other sources of funding that he sees that might be impactful to the expansion of broadband across the state. So Greg, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Well, thank you, Teresa, and thank you for that, that kind introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Greg Winkler again. I'm a regional manager with the Colorado Department of Local Affairs. My territory is the Northern Mountains, but I'm also the broadband liaison for the department. The broadband program in DOLA started back in 2009 with a $3.2 million investment from the Colorado General Assembly under Senate Bill 232. It was to establish a state-of-the-art telecommunications network between governmental offices, educational institutions, law enforcement, libraries, fire departments, and medical facilities, and it was in southwestern Colorado. It was an independent community anchor institution loop in the towns of Mancos, Bayfield, Cortez, Durango, and that's what started it off. You can change the slide. In 2013, the then executive director of DOLA recognized that there was a need for a statewide broadband initiative. And Mr. Brown, at that point in time, set aside $20 million of severance tax money for the development of strategic regional broadband plans, and then for the implementation of middle mile fiber installations. Next slide, please. DOLA's approach to broadband investment was generated by local governments. They came to us, asked us for assistance to help with instituting broadband in their communities. And they saw it as a way to enhance their economic development, to promote better communications between jurisdictions, and support better access with distance learning opportunities and telemedicine. Next slide, please. So we started off our program doing broadband planning grants, and to date, DOLA has done 21 regional strategic broadband plans that were across the state. In fact, we believe that we've covered every part of the state with one of these regional broadband plans to be able to understand or have the communities understand what their current situations were, what needed to be done in order to enhance their broadband services, and to find out whether or not there was the ability to do public-private partnerships in trying to achieve the broadband goals. All of our grants, the way these were laid out was to make sure that there would be an open access network through all the broadband plans. Local governments can still apply for broadband planning grants. They are, if there is a regional broadband planning grant that needs to be done, it's a 75-25 grant. And then local governments that want to apply for a grant just specifically dealing with a particular project, that cash match is 50-50. So next slide, please. The next part of our program was to do middle mile infrastructure grants. And middle mile to us is a project that creates connectivity from the backbone to the community. It can establish local area networks. And that is the way we look at loops of community anchor institutions, connecting the fire station, the school, the police station, the recreation department, courthouses, and so forth like that. That's how we see loops that are made. And that's what we did in southwestern Colorado with our initial investment back in 2009. But all middle mile implementation projects have to be consistent with a regional plan. That was our premise. That's one of our 3 premises for our entire program, which I'll get to in a moment. Next slide, please. I want everyone to know on the call that DOLA restricts its middle mile investments to only have open access networks, which are competitively neutral models. That means that if there is a middle mile connection between 2 communities, when it gets from point A to point B, both point A and point B can be community anchor institutions, can also be carrier neutral locations, and in which case any ISP that is interested in obtaining service from that system can do it without bias of who they are or what kind of network they want to use. As with other capital construction projects that DOLA does, we require a 50% grant match on a dollar-for-dollar basis in order to do these projects. And that's just to make sure that we get the biggest bang and contributions from the local community. If a local community finds itself in a situation where they're financially unable to contribute at a 50% level, then we would consider a level at about 25% or between 25 and 50 in order to make the project work, if that's necessary. So I have to deviate here and just say that the basic rules of our program is that in order to do middle mile, you have to have a plan. We will not fund middle mile unless there's a plan that it's consistent with. Any of the implementation middle mile plans have to be open access. And that means they're open to all ISPs working in the state of Colorado. And then lastly, we do not make any investments in last mile systems. We require that jurisdictions that participate with us have at least the idea of how the last mile is going to work, but none of the money we contribute to a program will go to last mile. So the 3 basic things: got to have a plan, has to be open access, and we will not invest in last mile. Next slide, please. all of our applications are reviewed by DOLA's regional broadband coordinators, of which we have two. And I think for most everybody on the call, everyone knows Nate Wallowitz that serves the northern part of the state, and then Virgil Turner, who serves the southern part of the state. And those two gentlemen look at every broadband application to make sure it's consistent with our policies and to make sure that the project as presented to us is feasible and workable. Additional people that look at it are three regional managers like myself that are not associated with the project. So it wouldn't be a regional manager from that geographic area where the project arrives. And then we also have our agency partners at the Office of Information Technologies and the Colorado Broadband Office that provides a review of the application. Once those reviews are done, that information is passed along to the project manager or the program manager for the Department of Local Affairs Energy Mineral Program. And then he makes the recommendation to the director of the Division of Local Government, who then in turn makes a recommendation to the executive director of the Department of Local Affairs for the final decision. So there are many eyes that look at each application. We're trying to make sure that the applications are impactful, that they benefit both the state in a macro sense, and also benefit the communities to make sure that it's a good investment all the way around. So speaking of investment, next slide, please. As I said, we started this in 2013. The money that we invested in 2009 was not part of the established broadband program. But in 2013, $20 million was set aside. Subsequent to that, we've set aside an additional $10 million. And as you can see by the slide, we've invested about $6 million in planning grants, both regional strategic planning grants and also sub-county or municipal grants for implementation of projects. We have done almost $60 million in infrastructure, which is middle mile, for a grand total since 2013 of about $65.6 million in investments in the state of Colorado to make broadband better. Next slide, please. So with that money, what we were able to do is we used approximately about $15 million to put equipment at each end of middle mile runs. The equipment is the trigger that makes it all work. It's what lights up the fiber in order to have the speeds going from point A to point B and creates the interconnectivity. In doing what we've done in our middle mile project, we've done 47 miles of aerial fiber at about $3 million. There's been 100 miles of buried fiber, cost of about $22.5 million. But I think that the thing where we've been able to use our money the best is that we have been able to use existing fiber that other companies have, dark fiber, that other companies have, that they are willing to lease a portion of their fiber. And we have been able to do 972 miles at a cost of just about $19 million to get that done. So I think all in all, that is probably our shining star of the program, that we've been able to spend the least amount of money and gotten the biggest bang for our buck and mileage as we've gone along. So this next slide that we're going to do, Antonio, this is the trick slide. We're going to go to here, and as you can see, this is a pretty gray and dark map, but we're going to light it up here shortly. This was a story map that was put together by both Virgil and Nate to show what we have done in the state of Colorado. So, Antonio, I'll ask you to click uh, the first box that we have, and it calls out for the Southwestern COG sites. And that was the original $3.2 million investment in the SCAN project, to where we created community anchor institution loops in each one of those cities. Unfortunately, we hadn't developed our program as well as we could have or should have at that point in time. And we didn't allow for the interconnection of those communities. And we didn't allow for the proper planning to see what needed to be done before we allocated the money. So those entities are still out there. We're going to try to connect them in the future, and we'll show you how we're going to do that at another toggle here. So the next click I'm going to ask Antonio to do is Region 10's sites. These are all the sites that Region 10 has been able to put together, and click that one. And that will show you that one right there, Antonio, that'd be great. That will show you the Region 10 network that we've created on the western slope. Goes all the way from Grand Junction down to Nucla and over to Gunnison through Montrose. So our next click is going to be Pickens County sites. These are independent sites, tower sites that we've helped Pickens County connect through microwave link to enhance their emergency communication system. We've just recently approved an enhancement to the Roaring Fork Valley program with Holy Cross Energy. Pickens County, the city of Aspen, Snowmass Village, and the town of Basalt are all connecting on an aerial fiber link that will run from Glenwood Springs to Aspen. That's about 44 miles of, once again, an IRU that was contained in the IRU number that I was able to show you before, but that's going to provide high-speed fiber network that comes off of Project Thor, which we'll get to here in a minute, and provide that service all the way into Aspen. So the Pickens County network, if you can click on that, that just shows the connections that we've made between those towers. Mostly, I think they're microwave links, but in some cases, we have actually connected fiber to the towers to enhance the microwave link. So the next click we're going to do is for the Northwest COG. And those are all the sites that we were able to connect. You can go ahead and do the next one too, that we were able to connect with Project Thor. It starts in Denver. It runs along I-70, connects in Georgetown, goes over Loveland Pass, connects Silverthorne, Frisco, Breckenridge, onto Eagle. Now it goes out to Glenwood Springs, and in a subsequent effort that we've just approved, there's going to be a connection on I-70 from Glenwood Springs to Grand Junction to be able to connect Project Thor from Grand Junction to Denver, and then take the loop north. It picks up Craig, Steamboat, into Grand County, and then back to I-70, back to Denver. So it's a full loop of 178 miles to make sure that there is redundancy in the northern part of Colorado. We can click on the next two, which are the Upper Arkansas Area Council of Governments, where we've been able to create some network connections up in Park County, from Bailey down to Platte Canyon High School. And then also we've been able to connect Fairplay and Alma in connections to be able to bring service to those towns. And that was done with a public-private partnership of I'm gonna get this name right. We're gonna get this name wrong, I think, but it's the South Park Telephone Company was the private industry that worked with Park County in order to get that done. Um, the other part of what's going on there is there is uh, a new fiber build that we're trying to build in Lake George, Colorado this summer, which will create connectivity coming in from the east of Teller County, and it will create a link all the way through Lake George into Hartselle and then back up to Fairplay. So this next click we're going to do is an independent effort that was done by Larimer County. We have traditionally only funded projects in the rural areas, and while Fort Collins has an extensive network through their fiber, their broadband efforts called Connection. This dot represents our ability to be able to work in the Estes Park area, I believe, to where we were able to work with the Platte River Power Authority to bring fiber into Estes Park. And then it also is creating a smart city network for Estes Park to help with its utility and utilities and utility building throughout that community. Okay, the next click is ECALG. That's some efforts that were, yeah, we can click CDOT's fiber share. That would be good. That's the red part. What we're doing there is we cooperate with and actually lease some fiber from CDOT's network. And that's part of what Project Thor is between Denver and Glenwood Springs. It also runs north and south along I-25 and then goes out a portion on I-70. And we're trying to do some more work out on the Eastern Plains as this goes on. These next two, Bison Site and Bison Network, is a independent fiber network for higher education. It connects all of the institutions of college institutions of CSU, CU, School of Mines, goes down to CSU in Pueblo and UCCS in Colorado Springs. And we are trying to work out now that we've, or we're going to make that final connection out to Grand Junction to see whether or not we can run that connection out to the Western Slope to create other universities such as Colorado Mesa, Gunnison, Western State in Gunnison, and then be able to maybe connect Adams State and Fort Lewis down in the Southwest. So that's one of the areas that we're trying to make an expansion of that network in order to have an independent network for educational research projects. So if you can click on the next thing there, Hudson. We are presently, we've given Hudson a grant to do a community anchor institution loop and a system for the town of Hudson. We've run fiber out on Interstate 76, and that project is still being negotiated with a network operator, but we still have high hopes that we'll be able to get that done. So if you'll skip future connections and go to the next region, let's see what, okay, that just sort of outlines where things are going. Oh, NECALG, that dot out there. Now it refreshes my memory now that we put a frame around the map of Colorado. We've established, we afforded grant monies to the town of Ray and Yuma County to create an independent community anchor institution network in the town of Ray and some surrounding areas, so that they have fiber broadband and gig speed broadband to their town out there. So that's what the NECALG click was. All right, so if you'll just, yeah, let's go and click those. Rural broadband, and okay, and then, all right, that just puts it. Now, if we go to future connections, these are some of the things that we would like to be able to fund with future monies that we may be able to get from the legislature, that we may be able to generate from severance tax dollars and the allocation that our executive director continues to make, and also that we might be able to utilize with local governments some of the American Recovery Plan money. But what we're trying to do here, you'll see in the southwest corner, is connect all of those communities that were originally set up in the SCAN network, be able to run a dedicated line south out of Colorado into Albuquerque for another set of redundant paths. Also, we'd like to be able to run some of the from Region 10 into Grand Junction and then out to Salt Lake for an additional redundant path, and then back through to get to back to Project Thor to get to the western side of Colorado. There are our ability to be able to go up 285 into Denver that way is another way we want to go. And then we want to be able to cut across and be able to go from 285 over to Colorado Springs in order to create that link. So those are the things that we've identified as places we want to go to make major runs in the middle mile network to be able to enhance what we're doing in the state of Colorado. So I think I'm going to leave it there, and I'll be more than happy to answer any questions that anyone may have. And I appreciate your time and attention.
Thank you so much, Greg. We really appreciate you. That was a solid, thoughtful walkthrough, and I think we're going to have to put the spreadsheet or the lines around the state of Colorado next time first, because I was even lost. Granted, I'm not a native like you probably, so I was a little lost. I knew we were in the middle of the mountains. So I love that story map. It really gives you a very vivid, grounding of where the investments have been made. So I want to open things up now to the audience. Don't be shy. There's a good number of us, but not too large. So it'd be a great time for a conversation. I know a lot of you may have questions, and I have Craig. I'm going to butcher your last name, Craig, but it's Schweisel. Is that correct?
Schweikel. Yep, Schweikel.
Thank you. So it sounds like you have a question for Greg.
Hey, Greg. When you think about the future connections here, do you have any sense of prioritization, and then how would that priority dovetail with the RDOF plan builds in Colorado? When those folks are looking at building the last mile with the RDOF funds, but they effectively need some way to hook up with the middle mile and connect back to Denver. So how do you think about those two mashing up?
Craig, that question is a bit beyond me. I would have to tell you. If Virgil or Nate were on the phone, they might be able to answer how those two things correlate. I would tell you that the way things come to us is from local governments that say how they want to improve things in their communities and what they have to do in order to make that happen. So I apologize for not being able to answer your question. Go ahead.
Greg, I can help you out. So Greg, I'm sorry, I got two Gregs here. So Greg, my position with the Colorado Broadband Office is focusing on the federal funding sources. And so, yeah, although the state of Colorado is doing everything we possibly can to approach broadband funding from a holistic perspective, as you know, the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund is a federally administered program. And so what the state of Colorado has done through the Department of Local Agencies is, receive grant requests from communities that have engaged in and applied for funding for strategic planning for broadband deployment in the state. And so if those RDOF winners, when they get through the long form process, right? Those are not approved yet. They're going through the process. When those companies begin the process of deploying, what we will be working with them is to identify the areas that are closest to them that they can have access to this middle mile infrastructure and work with the purveyors of those communities that have received middle mile grant awards. But you have to understand that the way the state's middle mile and last mile grant applications have come up is through an organic need and an application being filed by either a community for middle mile or an internet service provider for last mile. So the RDOF is trying to get to, provide broadband to the home in areas that have no service, but it wasn't, the FCC didn't align that with what's happening in each state's organic deployment of broadband funding for their state. So we'll work with them, we'll let them know where this is, but those two programs are not, designed to have automatically meshed. They're kind of operating in parallel, and we'll identify those areas and help them try to get connectivity through those middle mile awarded and built initiatives. Does that help, Greg?
Yeah, it's Craig.
Oh, it is Craig. Okay.
Yep. No, you're right. Does the federal funding prevent an area from being applicable for the DOLA funding middle mile?
No, the two different programs. DOLA is a middle mile program, and the RDOF is a last mile. So those are not, one would not be considered served just because it has DOLA funding in it. It is my understanding.
That's correct.
And we don't do that in our state level, Craig. Our state level, if there is middle mile funding, that does not exclude applicants from applying in our last mile grant program at the Broadband Deployment Board.
Okay, no, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, there's a whole lot of fiber plans, at least hopeful fiber plans with that federal program in areas that weren't covered by the satellite and a few of the WISP areas, but we have a lot of fiber areas in Colorado that'll need to be hooked up.
Agreed. So Greg, Virgil's dialed in, so he's on the call, but I think as far as that question is concerned, I think we're good with answering Craig's question. Yep. So if I can open it up to others, please, that was great. Craig just jumped right in. Other questions?
Steven's got a question.
Excellent.
Oh, hey, I just had a question about the matching funds. I think you said it was 50%, but if they can't meet the 50% threshold, you can lower it anywhere between 25 and 50. Is that correct, Greg?
It is. If they can show a financial hardship that they can't afford the 50%, then we'll take into consideration what they might be able to do, but it would not go lower than 25%. It would probably be somewhere between the two.
If they are unable to meet the 50% threshold, does that change would they be changing their dollar amounts requested? Does that, you know what I mean? Are they still able to ask for the same amount of requested funds, or does that affect their funds that they're asking for if they can't, you know what I mean?
No, we'd look at the whole project and if it needs a certain amount of money in order to get it to make the project get done, and they can't come up with the appropriate amount of match, if we're to subsidize the difference. That would just be something we would do. We try not to diminish the practicality of the project.
I see. And then lastly, you mentioned, you know, the dark fiber, but I wasn't sure what IRU is. It said IRU/dark fiber or something. I wasn't
Irrevocable,
sure.
irrevocable right of use. It's a lease.
Okay, got it.
Indefeasible right
question.
of use, yeah, right?
Thank you.
Amy,
Excellent.
Hey, Greg, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. I've probably heard this before, but I have a couple of questions related to this map, which is just such a great visual. So one of with our the fall needs assessment that was done in 2020 for schools, it identified by region this Southwest, which included San Luis Valley, and the Southeast were kind of the two top areas for connectivity issues, according to that survey and from the superintendents and BOCES. So I think fairly reliable information. So I think this, that kind of prioritizes, for me at least, these areas. And I'm just wondering how this will address that, and what's sort of the timeline in place do you see? And I don't see anything on this map really on the Southeast and the Eastern Plains, which I'm sure you can speak to and remind me why that is.
Yeah. Well, I will tell you that there are a couple things that are, I guess, percolating is the best way to say it right now. Sked and Eric Gobelman are making some real inroads in the Southeast to try to put together a program with his communities in order to be able to put together a plan, have a person that will spearhead that, and then try to put together, after the plan's done, the implementation process of what has been developed through the plans. Now, I know that part of that he's making inroads with some of the local governments there. He's trying to get them to allocate a few of their American Recovery Plan dollars in order for the planning process, and then maybe even be able to get some of those communities to put away a larger amount to act as matching funds for other grant opportunities to be able to extend that out. And then I know that that's what he's been trying to do. I know you're very familiar with what's going on in the San Luis Valley as to what Kevin Wilkins is doing out there. And I apologize, I forgot the young lady's name who's working with him, but
Nellie Stagg.
Yeah, Nellie Stagg.
Yeah,
she's been quite the dynamo.
Are they also, is San Luis Valley also looking at setting aside funds for matching grants and things like that, the ARP?
It's
local government.
I've not been told that. I've participated in the last couple meetings that they've had just to hear how they were trying to put it together. I don't think they're trying to mirror what Eric is doing, although they probably ought to talk to one another to trade ideas.
Yep.
Because I have to tell you that the thing that although this map looks very heavily weighted towards the western side of the state and the western slope, the reason that the efforts and the successes have been made here is because there have been communities and champions within those communities that have put together things to put these projects together. Yeah. Well, the same thing needs to happen in the San Luis Valley and in the Southeast. Now, I will also tell you that I'm working with my regional counterpart up in the Northeast, Greg Edel, and he's been working with all his communities, and we're trying to put together an understanding of what's there, what's missing in a county by county kind of format to be able to determine what it is we need to do. I know that we're also talking with the BOCES out in Burlington to be able to, it appears they have a network that runs from Denver out to Burlington, and it might be something we might be able to capitalize on if we can make the proper connections, which then would open up an IRU, and then the ability for the communities along that route to be able to create community anchor institution loops and carrier neutral locations, and give the opportunity for the independent service providers in the area to be able to develop their business in a much more robust fashion.
And Greg,
Great.
may I fill that out just a little bit too, Amy? I don't want to miss this opportunity. Greg just brought up a point. There's both of the state programs, both the last mile and the middle mile programs. They are grant receipt, application receipt oriented, which means internet service providers or communities have to apply for this funding. As you know, in this legislative session, there is an initiative to allow the Broadband Deployment Board to target with an RFP process chronically unserved areas to solicit applications from providers.
That's
The
great.
second, right. So I think we need to really we have to look at this in a very holistic way. It's not the state saying, we're just going to put money here, here, and here. It is actually community driven. So Greg is bringing up a critical point. It is that, and you know this one, Amy, right? This is, you've got to have the local champions because broadband is a block to block effort. It just is. And so what we're seeing is these communities are starting to get more, vocal, and they're saying, they're bringing together their resources and saying, we need these resources in our communities. But right now, as you know, most federal or state programs do not fund the ability to have that, to pay for technical support in those areas. They just, both federal and state don't have that element of technical support in them. And so I think it's a matter of, having the ability to target money to investments in those areas that need the greatest assistance. The second thing I will say is that the state broadband mapping is all provided by the industry on a voluntary basis. So what we see even in the San Luis Valley is you've got two large providers down there that, and actually there's three, because if you consider CenturyLink, San Luis Valley Rural Electric's CLO subsidiary and Jade Communications, you've got a number of providers in that area that are saying 25.3, that standard is still being used to measure where funding at the federal level or the state level can even go, can even have an opportunity to pursue funding. So I think it's really important to understand that it's not the state directing this money to areas and leaving out the plains, the Northeast or the Southeast. It is a function of the way we've set up our state and our federal programs.
Yeah, I think I'm glad that you both spoke to that, because I wasn't trying to necessarily, I think that tells the full picture, and that helps me to understand that more and hunt, what I sort of thought was going on as well. But I do, this whole idea of equity and where do we, how do we have the ability to solicit and support these areas that maybe have less, honestly, relative wealth. Western Slope has pockets of greater wealth. I think we all know that from our resort communities and whatnot to to bolster these efforts and move them along. So how do we get into these, Southeast, the San Luis Valley, other Eastern Plains communities, where there might even be a hesitancy to actually apply for these funds? So I appreciate that. And an add on to that, and maybe a little bit of follow up, as Greg knows, I've been working with some school districts on the Eastern Plains of the Pikes Peak region. And there's connectivity issues there, but the county doesn't seem to really be that motivated to address them. So, and I've heard, I don't know the situation in Jefferson County, but I just heard there's some small mountain communities that also have connectivity issues. So I guess I'm just sort of wondering how you all think about those situations right next to a large urban metro areas. We have these really small communities that might not necessarily have the capacity, to really advance these efforts, and yet those that are holding these plans, these regional plans, are also not moving on it. So how do you rectify this, or how are you thinking about these types of situations? Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Yeah, it does. And I understand. I will say this. We did a regional strategic broadband plan for the Eastern Plains of El Paso County. So, we went, I don't know, 10 or 15 miles east of I-25 and tried to do something that would affect the Calhan, Simla, places like that to try to put together some plans. We tried to incorporate those with the East Central Colorado Council of Governments to do that. There does need to be some cajoling from those communities to their elected leaders to see whether or not there can be something done on their behalf. They shouldn't be left out in the cold, but and they don't really have the resources to be able to do it. But resources get challenged every day about where they get used and where they get spent. I'm trying. So you talked about El Paso County. Where else did you talk about? Because
Nate actually just contacted me to say something about Jefferson County School District is identifying some areas that need connection. Yeah.
Okay. One of the other places that we try to do is when Clear Creek County was doing their strategic plan, we tried to incorporate northwestern Jefferson County because it's closer and it's more aligned to Clear Creek County than it would be to the metropolitan areas of Jefferson County. And frankly, it just didn't get enough traction with the leaders for Jefferson County to participate. So Clear Creek County and Gilpin County went and did it on their own. We went through 6 months of trying to get those guys to come on board, and I think their IT people did. It was just it was not seen as something that they wanted to lean into at that point in time. So.
Well, and if I could add some light or shed color on this, also the issue is until there is a change in the standard of the broadband standard of what is considered served or unserved, that 25.3 standard, communities don't have a lot of feet they don't have ground to stand on to request federal or state funding for areas that basically have copper infrastructure, because copper will support to number of feet 25.3. And so, Amy, I think there's a disconnect on what communities need for a functional level of broadband, for e-learning, for telemedicine, for all of that. I think the public and policymakers are talking past each other. Until you change that standard, that definition of what broadband is, you cannot change served or unserved, because you are stuck in this world of 25/3 and under. It is a systemic issue that until you hit that, until you address the issue of what is considered served and unserved and what that standard of broadband is, then you can't seek the funding to be able to lift up the community.
Teresa, I want to get to Mr. Litterdale. He had a question in the chat, and I'd like to make sure we cover that up.
Thank you both.
Thank you for taking my question. I am, as far as I know, tail end Charlie on the last mile. Best I can tell, according to Google, I'm 1.09 miles from the DMARC where my service comes from. CenturyLink says that they offer 10 meg down to my house, 0.8 up. To be honest with you, I run a speed test every 5 minutes, database it, and the average is about 16.2 or 16.4 meg down. But because what I can tell that CenturyLink does, they describe an area, a polygon, and down in one corner, they say, this is where the feed's from. This feed is 60 meg. Therefore, the entire area gets 60 megs.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't take into account that I'm on the tail end of just over a mile of 60-year-old copper that's been cut and spliced so many times that I couldn't get 25 down here if I wanted. I know this is not, this is middle mile, which is not what I'm worried about. But I wished I had a picture that I could show you of the trench that goes through my side yard, where they put in orange plastic pipe to run the fiber through my yard. And it's like, oh no, sorry, CenturyLink says you qualify for 60. Therefore, you can't connect to the fiber. I don't get 60. Right? I guess what I'm asking is, who can I talk to? Because I know you're middle mile. Oh, hi, Teresa. And to get some help on this, and I know everybody on probably the eastern quarter of this polygon couldn't get 25 if they wanted.
If I may address that directly, Cal, you're telling me you're doing a speed test every 5 minutes. I would invite you to switch your speed test, to go to the Colorado Broadband office and use our speed test and provide your address in coordination with the speed that you receive. What that will give the Colorado Broadband office and our mapping efforts is direct crowdsourced data of the actual bandwidth that you are experiencing. That speed
Been
test,
there, done that.
Okay, and the folks that are in your group. So that information helps us then, if there is an application from an internet service provider in that area, we can say, nope, Cal gave us information. It shows they're only getting 8 meg down and 0.08 up. And so even though the companies are reporting that they provide broadband in that area, we see that the customers are actually not experiencing that same level of broadband. And then those state and federal funds can be contested, and that area can be a recipient of federal or state funding.
Yeah, okay. I wished I've got the graph I could probably show you, except only one person can share at a time, so.
Well, we hear how we understand there is a disconnect between what is reported and what customers experience. And what we are trying to do at the Colorado Broadband Office is to work with customers like you and also the industry, the ISPs, to get better data so that then those state and federal funds can be available for providers to apply for expanding broadband in those areas that do not have 25 megabits down and 3 megabits up.
Yeah, and but you understand the distance problem, because you just mentioned
Absolutely.
something,
Yeah.
you know.
So it would need to be applied for a fixed wireless solution, or potentially a provider that wanted to provide some type of fixed solution to the home. That's what we would anticipate.
Yeah, and I live in the middle of Black Forest, if you know that area. It's heavily treed, lots of ponderosa pine. Not only that, I'm in a electronic hole. When I bring up my phone, I get a period. No bars, just the period. You know, so there's no, well, gee, T-Mobile's got, you know, their wireless solution. Not at my house, they don't. Neither does Verizon. Nobody does, because, you know, CenturyLink comes out here, stands in my driveway, you know, and he picks up his phone and goes, I don't have any service. Why? Yeah. Because you don't cover this hole.
Right. Well, and Cal, I understand. So what I think we can do is to take this part of the conversation offline, considering this is part of a conversation about middle mile. And I do want to make sure Greg has an opportunity to have some closing remarks to kind of give folks an opportunity to hear his message, his call to action for communities with regard to his program. So we've got about 2 minutes left, Greg. Whatever closing remarks you would like to make, or to help, you know, identify for communities how they can be successful in the middle mile program, please share your insights and wisdom on and your what you want to leave these folks with. What's your call to action for them?
Okay. Well, thanks very much, Antonio and Teresa, for inviting me to come and make this presentation today. I appreciate it. I hope for those of you who didn't know about our program now know about our program. Two things that we're looking towards in the future is it appears there's legislation going through the General Assembly right now, which might, if passed, afford us $5 million in state stimulus money to create better interconnectivity through middle mile. So we're very hopeful that that will happen. That will be able to take care of some of the applications that would come through for additional middle mile work that needs to be done from local communities. I would also tell everybody that those local governments that are going to receive American Recovery Plan Act money, broadband is one of the places that is approved for expenditure. And if you may not have an idea now, but if there is to be some reserve that you could put off to the side so that you could develop plans, either through working with Virgil or Nate or myself or any of your regional managers to try to work in projects that will enhance the middle mile across the state of Colorado, we'd just be tickled to be able to help do that. So hopefully we'll have about $5 million from state stimulus money. We're going to have $2.5 million from severance tax money to be able to work our program. So that should be a little bit better than what we've had in the past. And we look forward to working with you as we go forward and try to make this a better state as far as broadband goes. So thanks again. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. We really appreciate it. And everyone, I want to let you know, please join us on June 22nd at noon. The Colorado Broadband Office will have our next session in our Lunch and Learn series. This session will feature CEO of Dan Davis of Arcadian Infocom. Founded in 2018, Arcadian designs, builds, and operates high-capacity long-haul fiber optic cable routes in the U.S. And they do purposefully route through their fiber backbones through away from existing fiber routes and through rural areas, trying to create both business and social value for those communities. So in this Colorado Broadband Office Lunch and Learn session, Arcadian will present its plans to run fiber from the southwest corner of Colorado into Denver. So join us to hear how this fiber run will impact rural parts of Colorado. You can register at broadband.co.gov and join us for that conversation. So thank you again today. We really appreciate your participation, and we hope you'll come back and join us every month for these types of conversation about Colorado's broadband future. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, everyone.